beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. I go to the movie and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Lord, there've been times that I thought I could last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains and hillsides enough to climb, and there are oceans and rivers enough to cross, enough to last till the end of time. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there is just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some,
keep growing, growing on. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Hey, just wait and see, someday we'll all be free. Yeah. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. It won't be long. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Take it from me, take it from me.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out today in such inclement weather. I knew it was going to be cold, but I was hoping the snow would stay away, but I know it's coming and you're here, so that's all that matters. And thank you to everyone who's on Zoom with us today as a virtual attendee. I really appreciate that. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Harford County appreciates you being here as well. In honor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Harford County, otherwise known as UUFHC, is excited to host this Dr. King program and are glad you have came to visit with us in person or virtually. We will walk you through a history of civil rights here in Harford County, as if it was a story from its origin to having youth engage with our audience on iconic messages of civil rights leaders. We have attendees here in person, via a video recording, and by means of a written testimony who will speak to their personal experiences, accounts of civil rights in Harford County, and observations. We highlight for you a local project housed within the Harford County Community College, after which you will immediately ask questions if you need to. And prior to the benediction, we will open the floor to you, our beloved guests, visitors, and Unitarian Universalist family to generally speak on your experience pertaining to civil rights in Harford County or elsewhere. So this is really a holistic program, whether you're virtual or in person, and not just people who made this particular event happen, but you're a part of this event. And yes, this includes, again, our attendees on Zoom. In-person guests are invited to fellowship afterward with one another by having reflections and refreshments from entering the first door in the rear right over there of the room and returning back to the sanctuary with your food. Those of you who are on Zoom are equally invited to share your thoughts with one another. Should you need to excuse yourself for the bathroom, you may exit the rear doors in the back, make a right, and walk down the hall, and straight down the hall on your left are the bathrooms, or alternatively, you may exit this door here, make a left, and the bathrooms are on the right. Before we continue on with the actual program, I want to share with you something very, very special. It is called The Green Book. There was a movie about the Green Book made, I believe, in 2017 or 2018. It is a house copy, and you all will be welcome to look at it before you leave here today. But I do want to share with you a little history about the Green Book, because it does list a property in Havre de Grace, Harford County. The history of the Green Book began in 1936 when a postal worker and World War I veteran from New Jersey named Victor Green set out to create a guide that would help Black travelers travel safely, compiling resources to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and to make his trip more enjoyable. Those are his words. But what he ended up publishing was the Negro Motorist Green Book from 1936 to 1966, with only a pause during World War II. Mr. Green published the title under various names. You may see it as the Negro Motorist Green Book, the Negro Traveler's Green Book, or the Traveler's Green Book. This edition right here is from 1959. The listings featured hotels, restaurants, beauty salons, nightclubs, bars, gas stations, even private homes where Black travelers would be welcome. They were arranged by state and subdivided by city, giving the name and address of each business. The original publication focused on New York City, but the coverage eventually spread nationwide, and later editions even had international listings. The edition, the first one, had only 10 pages and was sold for 25 cents. As the book became successful, Green retired from the post office and hired a small publishing staff that operated in Harlem, New York. In 1947, Green also opened up a travel agency. By 1949, the book was more than 80 pages, including advertisements. The guide was sold through mail order at a service station, Esso. And Esso in particular was one of the few oil companies willing to sell franchises to African Americans. A deal with the Esso chain allowed Green to distribute his guide more widely so that by 1962, there were reportedly 2 million copies in circulation. Later editions of the Green Book contained an introduction with this optimistic message. Quote, "There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. This is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish this information for your convenience each year." The 1966 edition was the last to be published after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed racial discrimination in public accommodations. So before we sing "Lift Every Voice and Sing," the Black National Anthem, I would like to share a brief history of it. The poem, now anthem, was created by James Weldon Johnson and performed for the first time by 500 school children in the celebration of President Lincoln's birthday on February 12, 1900, in Jacksonville, Florida. James Weldon Johnson was the principal of the segregated Stanton School where the children attended. The poem was set to music by Johnson's brother, John Rosamond Johnson, and soon adopted by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, as its official song. It was endorsed by Booker T. Washington in 1905 and became the official song in 1919 of the NAACP. The next words specifically that I share with you are from himself, James Weldon Johnson, written in 1935. Quote, "My brother, J. Rosamond Johnson, and I decided to write a song to be sung at the exercise," meaning the performance at the segregated school. "I wrote the words, and he wrote the music. Our New York publisher, Edward B. Marks, made mimeographed copies for us, and the song was taught to and sung by a chorus of 500 colored school children. Shortly afterwards, my brother and I moved from Jacksonville to New York, and the song passed out of our minds. But the children of Jacksonville kept singing it. They went off to other schools and they sang it, and they became teachers and taught it to other children. Within 20 years, it was being sung all over the South and in other parts of the country. Today, the song, popularly known as the Negro National Anthem, is quite generally used. The lines of this song repay me in an elation almost of exquisite anguish whenever I hear them sung by Negro children," unquote. You may follow the lyrics on the video screens, and within Zooms, please stand and sing along as you are able.
Good morning. It's a joy to welcome everyone to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Harford County, situated on the native lands of the Susquehannock people and land formerly owned by Walter Banks, whose picture is in the front. I'm Reverend J. Brooks. My pronouns are she and her. I am the interim minister here, serving this congregation during the liminal time between settled ministers. And it is such an honor to be able to speak on this significant national holiday. I am very grateful not only to this fellowship, which has a long history of engagement with the civil rights movement and the struggle for equity, but that also welcomes the opportunity to continue to support and ally with people of color. I'm especially grateful to the creative mind behind this program and the amazing organizing power of Marla Posey Moss. As a newcomer to this fellowship, I want to say it was really awesome to witness what she has been doing over the last month or so. Marla, I really am very grateful, and I just am impressed. One of the things that I have learned from my ministry, serving congregations through important transitions in congregational life, is that every moment in life is liminal. Whatever the present moment, we are always between the past and the future. Perhaps this is especially true of the civil rights movement. We can look back to the 1950s and 60s and see the power of nonviolent community action for change. And those people in that liminal moment could look back to 1900 and the birth of the song that is now called the Black National Anthem. And we, standing here in this time, not only can look back, but we can look forward into the future and acknowledge a shared hope for equity that hasn't yet emerged. We can look around in the present and see the many threads that we might follow to reach the future we hope to see. For me, the relevance of this holiday honoring Dr. King is threefold. First, it signals to all our children the importance of the goals of the civil rights movement, recognizing a black man's leadership and positive influence on America and the world. Second, it's a marker for the way leadership is changing. Beginning in the 1960s, beginning in the civil rights movement, people began to see the power of local communities to discuss and decide what they needed and what they would do to achieve it. Today, that approach, grassroots community organizing, is the gold standard for creating lasting change. Finally, and personally, this holiday is a measure of how my own understanding of leadership has changed. I now see my role as an ally to people of color, to the local communities most affected by a racialized system we hope to change. I see that I don't and I can't know what's best for others who are most affected by the racialized system in which we all live. And I now believe and accept that one of the most important things I can do as a white ally is to educate myself without ceasing about how the ways of that growing up white in a racialized society has shaped my instincts and still shapes my words and deeds today, often much to my regret. The celebration of Dr. King's life and legacy is important and relevant because each time we pause in the liminal moment to remember the past, to consider the present, and to look ahead to the future, each time we allow ourselves to feel the inspiration and power, not just of Dr. King's words, but of the communities that are still today working towards freedom. Each time we celebrate this day, we inspire ourselves and others. We become able to look around and see a country, troubled as it may be, that nonetheless is caught up in what Dr. King would call the creative turmoil of a true civilization waiting to be born. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Good afternoon. Harford County sits on the ancestral land of the Susquehannock indigenous people, which the Susquehanna River is named after. In 1652, Maryland became a colony and Harford County was created as part of Baltimore County until 1773, when the Maryland State Legislature established Harford County and its government. As we continue to identify Harford County and provide context on its environment, we think of the Mason-Dixon line, a boundary separating 4 U.S. states, forming the borders of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and West Virginia. It was surveyed and marked between 1763 and 1767 by 2 English surveyors, Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, to settle a border dispute between the Penn and Calvert families. Before and during the Civil War, the line was symbolic of the division between slaveholding and free states. In 1788, Maryland became the 7th state to ratify the U.S. Constitution, and in 1826, Maryland public schools were established by law. The Harford County government presides in Bel Air. With 2 other municipalities, Havre de Grace and Aberdeen, Harford County sits at the pinnacle of decisions pertaining to the segregation that was impacted by Supreme Court cases and federal law. Some examples of this. Margaret Morgan was born to free parents in the Mill Green area along Broad Creek off today's Route 646 in what it was then known as the Dublin District of the county. Yet, because documents were never formally signed that verified her parents' state of being manumitted, it became questionable if Miss Morgan was indeed free. She eventually moved with her family to York County, Pennsylvania in the 1830s. Pennsylvania was above the Mason-Dixon line and thus a northern state. Morgan and her children were later kidnapped and brought back to Maryland. The governor of Maryland at the time yielded to the demands of the state of Pennsylvania by turning over the 4 men who kidnapped her. A legal issue ensued in which it became questionable if enslaved persons could be returned into slavery once they had resided or escaped into the state that did not recognize or respect the institution of slavery. Subsequent legal issues make up the landmark 1842 Supreme Court case, Prigg versus Pennsylvania, regarding the legality of pursuing escaped or freed slaves who moved to free states. Prigg versus Pennsylvania also further highlighted the issue of competing jurisdiction between federal and state governments, and ultimately leading to the creation of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 that required that slaves be returned to their owners, even if they were in a free state. The Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves into the states they had seceded, went into effect on January 1st, 1863. But Maryland didn't legally free enslaved persons until 1864, when it held a referendum vote. The vote tipped in favor of abolition after the absentee ballots of soldiers fighting it for the North were counted. The slim margin was a 50.3% to 49.7% vote for abolition. On November 1st, 1864, Maryland's enslaved residents were declared free only a few months before the 13th Amendment was adopted on December 18, 1865, to abolish slavery. The first public school for African Americans in Harford County was the Hosanna School in Darlington, which was built in 1867. It is now a museum on the National Register of Historic Places. According to the Hosanna School website, the property was built on land formerly owned by a free African American named Cupid Paca, who bought 50 acres in 1822. Also significant was the McComas Institute that was established in Joppa in 1867. The school was one of 3 Freedmen Bureau schools in Harford County. The Freedmen's Bureau provided financial assistance to for the construction of the McComas Institute, and it continued to provide financial support until the Bureau was abolished in 1872. That same year, the Harford County Board of School Commissioners assumed operations and partnered with the nearby congregation Mount Zion Methodist Church, which had provided labor for the construction of the McComas Institute, as well as held the title to the building. The school closed in 1939. Many other schools for African Americans became operational given the desegregationist laws and practices. For example, according to Clio.com, the Clio.com website, in 1872, the state of Maryland provided the establishment of 1 school for blacks in each election district that the average attendance was 15. There was no high school for blacks in Maryland except in Baltimore County. Black students at high school age would have to travel to Philadelphia, Delaware, or the city to continue their education after grade school. In 1910, the Havre de Grace Colored School became the first public high school for African Americans in Harford County. Yet, in 1930, the county expanded the building to accommodate a high school. The Bel Air Colored High School originally opened as a grammar school in 1924 and became the home of Bel Air's High School for African American students on January 3, 1935. Lastly, there was the Central Consolidated School in Hickory that serviced students from the western half of the county. It was consolidated because it combined black students in grades kindergarten through 12 from 1951 to 1965. Such a consolidation brought about the closure of the Bel Air Colored High School and brought together the students from various black elementary schools across rural northern and central Harford County. We should all note that this consolidation existed until 1965, but was still 10 years after the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision that outlawed separate but equal doctrine. Segregated education was, quote, inherently unequal. While I won't share the histories of all the schools dedicated to the African Americans in Harford County, I shall mention the Ashbury Colored School in Churchville, as well as the Green Spring School in Webster. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sue Knaus, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm going to talk to you about this land of Walter Banks. Just around the corner, right before you get to our fellowship coming from Aberdeen, is Asbury Road, where Walter George Banks Sr. lived. Here's a photo of him. As I tell this story, the majority of it is from an excerpt of the sermon, Share the Bounty, told by then the UUFHC Reverend Lisa Ward, delivered on February 15th, 2004. Please remember Mr. Banks' identity, as he is a core reason why we are located in this very space. Also, please remember the name Charlie Hopkins Reed. Quote, by April 17th, in 1955, this growing group decided to contact Monroe Husbands, director of the fellowship program out of 25 Beacon Street, Boston, then the headquarters of the American Unitarian Association. We did not become Unitarian Universalist denomination until the merger of the denomination in 1961. By October, a temporary steering committee, Charles Reed, chairperson, Mary Woodward, secretary, and Dick Royal, treasurer, had formed, unquote. 1 month later, on November 20th, 1955, the first recorded business meeting was held at the Bel Air Library. By spring of 1957, 5 signatures were sent to the American Unitarian Association to officially register the Unitarian Fellowship of Harford County. In August of 1959, Charles Reed, a beloved lawyer in the county, Mr. Reed, a former president of the Harford Bar Association and a member of the Maryland Attorney Grievance Commission, filled out the necessary papers to create a religious corporation so that the 2¼ acre tract, lovingly named Agnostic Hollow, could be purchased for $5,000 on Lee Way in Bel Air. In the 1960s, as the head of the Harford County School Board and of the trustees of the Harford Community College, he helped to desegregate the school system and to pick the site for the college. This began the seriously vibrant tradition of sweat equity amongst the congregation. The building's yellow paint was removed and 2 coats of white were painted by the membership. This congregation has decades of experience in bringing their whole selves to corporate endeavor. Heart, soul, and body, and mind applied to the making of a religious home. Quickly, this fellowship's reputation was of a community of social action. The buildings were offered to many religious and community organizations for like-minded projects, ranging from stopping child hunger to mental health care. The most persistent collective voice was for racial justice, which included brave acts of dissension in KKK meetings and other forums. Quote, we have been asked to help in integration, Emmett Pybus wrote. We act now or never. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Harford County decided to act, unquote. Some of the work in the 60s and early 70s include these highlights. Charles Hopkins Reed, as president of the school board, led the county schools from racial segregation to integration in compliance with the law. Members helped organize chapters of the ACLU and the NAACP. Members participated in the drive for Black access to restaurant service. UUFHC offered their buildings for refuge to anti-racism and anti-war groups when needed. Reverend Alice Wesley described the discovery of this land. On my way to the office, I saw a man working in his garden on Churchville Road. I pulled into the driveway of the house next to the garden. As we walked towards each other, I realized the man was no stranger. He was Walter Banks, a distinguished black leader, now elderly, widely known as the Harford County father of the NAACP. The first time we talked of Walter's cornfield as a possible site for our new building, he said he hadn't really thought about selling. I asked him to consider it. A day or two later, seeing him out working again, I stopped again, thinking just to mention a tax deduction for anyone who sells land to a church for a price less than the appraised value. But as we neared one another, Walter began our conversation by saying and calling out, "I decided I'd let you have it." The Banks offered the land, 3.5 acres on a well-traveled road, for $70,000, essentially $50,000 less than it's appraised. That was only the beginning of the miracle. It was now up to 75 to 80 pledging units to come up with the money to purchase the land and build this church. At a small lead-giving meeting, 10 people amounting to 7 pledge units met to determine their lead gifts. These members, exhibiting an extraordinary leap of faith, pledged an immediate $70,000 with promise of another $74,000 later. These pledges were extraordinary in their generosity. More pledges, a UUA building loan and a bridge loan from a bank created the capital to build this building. This leap of faith directly impacts our congregational life today as we carry a debt load from the purchase of this land and building, which now includes another acre, primarily rented by the Montessori School to square off this prime Churchville location of rich love and history. We are direct builders of the dream, contributing dollars to give a home to a substantive Unitarian Universalist present in this county. You should all know that just recently, this building has cleared all its debts, and our fellowship owns it outright now. So, with this beautiful story of how the UUFHC got here, and with the help of Walter Banks, I'm going to ask Kim Roberts to preside over the offering.
Good afternoon. As this part of the program, we're going to have a free will offering, and your financial contributions will be provided to the Harford County branch of the NAACP. A link is provided in the Zoom chat for our Zoom attendees. And for those of us in person, I'm going to be coming around passing a collection basket, and anyone can contribute that way. You can also use your devices and contribute electronically to uufhc.net. We sincerely thank you for any offer your heart moves you to make this morning or for this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to that entire song. I love the lyrics to that song, Victory. That's what it's about. I'm really excited about this next portion. Make sure this stays up here. Yeah. All right. So, we're very, very fortunate today to have before us, in our very own living legend, in this fellowship right now as I'm speaking to you, Ms. Bertha Copeland. She's sitting right there with the beautiful hat. She is so dedicated to coming out here. I wasn't sure she was going to be able to make it because of the snow. When I visited Ms. Copeland's home, she had several albums of awards, letters, newspaper clippings, transcribed interviews, and photos. It is important that I visited her beautiful home when I did, because at 93, there was a lot of work still left to do. And she needed to know what time I was going to arrive because, she's very busy. But she made some time for me, and I loved every minute of it. Ms. Copeland has a significant number of professional accolades and designations. She is a 2011 recipient of Harford County's Living Treasures. She helped transport civil rights marchers across the Susquehanna River on their way to Washington, D.C. from New York. Also, she assisted in feeding and providing an area for them, the Freedom Riders, where they can put down their sleeping bags. She has registered African Americans to vote, as well as others, and she was positioned to witness events pertaining to the H. Rap Brown trial here in Bel Air, because at the time she served as a juror on a different case. She was so well known in the community that Dwight Pettit, a Baltimore lawyer, very prominent one, and a member of the first integrated graduating class from Aberdeen High School, recruited Ms. Copeland to get the Harford County vote out in the 1976 presidential election that put Jimmy Carter in office. My fellow Aquarian, Ms. Copeland, will be 94 on February 8th. In this video clip that you will see, she will highlight her role as the Freedom Riders came from New York on their way to Washington, D.C. She was right there during it all, y'all. Just briefly, I will share with you the goal of the Freedom Riders. They were Black and white activists who initially started out as a small band of persons but grew in numbers over time. They sought to dismantle segregation beginning in 1961 by protesting various venues who implemented discriminatory practices, such as not serving Black people in restaurants. They orchestrated by riding two buses together into the Deep South, two groups, the Congress of Racial Equality, called CORE, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, sponsored the Freedom Riders on their nonviolent protest of Southern segregation. On May 4th, 1961, 13 CORE and SNCC members embarked on their freedom ride through the American South with plans to engage in nonviolent protests and ensure that desegregation in public locales was enforced. Part of that was going through Route 40. Here's a clip pertaining to Ms. Copeland's involvement with the Freedom Riders. Greetings, we're here again with Ms. Bertha Copeland in Aberdeen, Maryland. She is 93 and will be 94 on February 8th of 2024. Ms. Bertha Copeland is going to talk with us about her participation and assistance in the civil rights movement as it relates to the Freedom Riders that came from New York on their way to Washington, D.C. So my first question for you, Ms. Copeland, is what was your role in assisting the Freedom Riders?
I worked at Prairie Point, Maryland, VA hospital, and I was leaving the job after my tour duty, and I saw the people there in Prairieville, and they could not go across the bridge. So I stopped and talked to one of the leaders, and I said to him that I would go across the bridge to have the grace to get Dr. Spry, because he was the president of the NAACP, and we got cars and we picked them up, and it brought them to my house. I lived at 39 Fenway Street in Hamilton Court. And we got together with some of the ladies and we fed them a meal. And they spent the night on the lawn by my house. And the next day they started walking on to Baltimore. And they were very pleased that we were able to do that. And other people came out, police cars came out checking to see if there was any problem, but there was no problem. So they were very pleased that we did that to help them out.
Good afternoon. Myself and some young friends who will join me in a few minutes would like to talk to you about the do's and don'ts of a good sit-in. While protesting segregationist laws, policies, and practices, Youth and young adults, both black and white change seekers, were intentionally trained to be resilient amid very dangerous attempts to defy the social order of their day. One of the most strategic methods of integrating public venues used was sit-in. Harford County was touched by freedom riders, as we just heard, attempting to desegregate eateries along Route 40, such as the Aberdeen Diner, the Musical Inn, and other restaurants along that corridor that were segregated on December 22nd, 1961. In fact, Maryland Governor John Millard Tall signed into law a public accommodation law, making Maryland the first state south of the Mason-Dixon line to ban discrimination in restaurants and hotels. The law became effective shortly after the 1964 election. In this part of the program, our youth and young adults will briefly share rules of engagement for you as you exercise your next sit-in. I will alternate what sit-in activists were told to do and not to do to be effective and successful in their nonviolent protest, because behaving outside of this training could have cost them their lives and ultimately the movement. Young, brave activists, will you step forward and join me, please? So again, we would like to share with you the do's and don'ts of a sit-in. Do.
Show yourself friendly and courteous at all times.
Don't.
Strike back nor cause curse if abused.
Do.
Sit straight, always face the counter.
Don't.
Laugh out.
Do.
Report all serious incidents to your leader.
Don't.
Hold conversations with a floor walker.
Do.
Refer information seekers to your leader in a polite manner.
Don't.
Leave your seat until your leader has given you permission to do so.
Do.
Remember the teachings of Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King.
Don't.
Block entries to stores outside nor the alleys inside.
And do.
Remember that love and nonviolence is the way.
Thank you. Brave activists, return to your seats.
I am very pleased to introduce our guest speaker this morning, or afternoon. Dr. James Carmel is a professor of history at Harford Community College with a PhD in history from the State University of New York at Buffalo. Dr. Carmel is the director of the Harford Civil Rights Project and the primary author of the HCRP Digital Exhibition mobile application. If you have a chance to look at that, it's awesome. He's a recent recipient of a major program grant from the National Endowment of the Humanities. His civil rights work also includes a grant project funded by the Harford County government and leadership of 2 recent civil rights tours of Harford County. He was formerly the first director of HCC's Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And he also participated in the NEH Institute held at the City University of New York's Graduate Center on Images of the Civil War. Dr. Carmel developed the first online history course in Maryland and has been an online instructor for approximately 20 years. He is an NISOD award recipient for excellence in teaching and learning. Dr. Carmel is a published author and research specialist in the fields of oral history, civil rights, and American financial history. And after his presentation, we will take questions from the audience, including those on Zoom, before moving forward with the remaining program. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Carmel, our keynote speaker.
thank you, Ms. Roberts, for that very warm introduction. And I also want to thank Marla very much for reaching out to me to come today. It was really a nice invitation, and I was happy to do it. I have had a lot of friends and colleagues throughout my term here, my life in Harford, who've been part of the congregation. I know one of them's here, Miss Marlene Lieb, who I've known for quite a long time from the college. Also, Dr. Deborah Cruz, who I know spends most of her time in Southwest Florida these days, but for a long time was a big part of the congregation. Also, Susie Gallahue, I don't know if she's here today, but yeah. Yeah, I think this is really a great occasion that we have, and I think this is just a really terrific program that you've developed here in your congregation to celebrate the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. So I think we have a PowerPoint that should be coming up. There we go, yeah. So, you know, the Harford Civil Rights Project is a program that we've been doing at the college since 2019, and I'll talk a little bit more about that soon. But today's focus is going to be on some of the highlights that we've learned about throughout the process, working with our students, doing research, oral history, and learning from the incredible people in Harford County who lived through and did really amazing things in the civil rights era, including Miss Bertha Copeland, who is just terrific that she's here today. So I also want to point out that one of the things we do in the Harford Civil Rights Project is occasionally have events open to the community. So in 2020, which was in the middle of our NEH grant, we had an online discussion 1 month after the murder of George Floyd, and your then minister, Reverend Maria McCabe, took part in that. So I want to acknowledge that too. It was a really interesting discussion that we had about race and equality and justice in Harford County. It was also just a few months into the COVID pandemic, so we were all online, which was not planned when we started the project, but we did what we could to have an online community discussion about that. So at some point in our K-12, maybe college educations, we probably hear the term that from the philosopher George Santayana, the Spanish philosopher, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. How many, just by shake your heads or raise your hand if you've heard that at some point in the past? Probably right. It's kind of a standard, almost like middle school thing, right? We hear at some point. I think that's when I learned it, like 8th grade. But the story of Dr. King and the American Civil Rights Movement, to me, both here in Harford County and across the United States, represents the flip side of Santayana's famous quote. That is to say, there are many positive aspects of the past that we can seek to emulate, if not replicate. And I think that's part that maybe we miss when we think about history as just something we want to learn about so we don't do it again. But people like Dr. King and all the millions of Americans involved in the civil rights movement, and including many here in Harford County, are an example for us to understand and move forward in the present and try to make our society and culture better, right? So history can have a positive side to it that I think is very important, and the civil rights story in this country is certainly one of those important stories. And so I think it's important that we think about where we are today and the occasion of Dr. King's birthday, as well as the year of the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, along with the act that came a year later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, were a very important piece in building the story of American society, of the evolution of democracy, which, if you know much about American history, which was a very qualified and exclusive province for many hundreds of years, right? And so if we understand American history in segments, we have the long era of slavery and very restricted political participation, not just people of color, but women and a whole bunch of other people. Then we get rid of slavery, and we have the 14th Amendment, which guarantees citizenship regardless of color at the end of the Civil War and a few years after the Civil War. And then we have a whole century, right, of Jim Crow and segregation before we finally get to the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s. So, you know, just think about that scope of history, but also think about the progress. And, you know, as a few people have said, in particular, I think the point that Reverend Brooks made, that it's an ongoing process, right? We know that we're certainly not finished, but that's a big part of the American story, isn't it? You know, that we just keep going. All right, so next slide, please, Ed. So just a quick overview of the Harford Civil Rights Project in a little more detail. What we do is work with students at the college, and our NEH grant, which we had from 2019 to 2021, was about getting students engaged to understand the civil rights era and understand this movement. And so at this point, we've worked with over 600 students at the college, many in history classes, but also English classes, drama. We had a computer information science class involved. And so that's been a big part of it. We also engage people in the community. So a big part of what we do is have the events that I mentioned before, and we try to have significant events. So the next one we have is coming up in right about a month from today, February. We're going to have our second annual Civil Rights Leadership Award event, and I'll have a little more detail on that at the end of my presentation. And then we have this digital app, which Ms. Roberts just mentioned, right? And if you haven't already, you know, you've got a chance here, because I want to move to the next slide. And there we go. So if you haven't already, you can use this QR code right now with your phone. It's a free download. And what we've done with the digital app is put together site-based stories of the civil rights era across Harford County, focusing on the Route 40 Freedom Ride in 1961, focusing on the long and very complicated challenge of desegregating the public schools. And I'm going to get into both of these topics in more detail. And so I strongly encourage you to do that. If you prefer, you can go on the web. It's harfordcivilrights.org, and it's the same content that you can see. And one of the really great things about the app and our website is we've incorporated oral history stories and clips that we've done. And an important aspect of our project has been community partnerships. So we've had a really strong partnership with the Harvard Grace Colored School Group, also with Hosanna School, with the Lily S. Carroll Jackson Civil Rights Museum in a part of Morgan State. It's directed by my colleague and very esteemed local historian, Dr. Iris Lee Barnes. And a few others. Visit Harford. We've done a lot. We're continuing to do that. So you can read more about it and look at all the stories. What I'm going to refer to today are all stories that we get more into detail in the app. So take a look at that. And if you want to talk to me after my presentation or later, I can also help you with the technology. All right, next slide, please. So what I want to do is right now take us back to the 1950s and talk a little bit about Jim Crow, Harford County. Now, Jim Crow is a term, of course, a lot of us know about. This long period, many decades from the end of the Civil War, about the 1870s through the 1960s of legal segregation, where race was the dividing point across much of the country, the Deep South, and right up to Maryland. And if you take a look at some of these images, you can see one of the things, the article on the right, you can see it says, Negroes fight one Rex car, other girl, gets a one-year term. But the operative term there is Negroes, and if you look at Harford County media, the newspapers like the Aegis, a few others from this era, they're often using this term. Now, why would they do that? You ask yourselves. And it's because they're defining the culture that we live in right now by race. Why put Negroes there? And then the image on the right of the screen is a little more upsetting, I think, and it's certainly something from our eyes in 2024 is very foreign, but it's not that long ago. It's from 1960, and it is advertising a minstrel show that would take place at Aberdeen High School, okay? Now, this is right around the same time that we've desegregated Harford County, Aberdeen High School. Not massively, but there are a handful of students that are now attending Aberdeen High School, or students of color, including Dwight Pettit. And just put yourself in the position of a student of color, if you can, in 1960, attending Aberdeen High School and knowing that on Friday night, here comes a minstrel show. The high school kids were not performers, but this was this theater group in which blackface was very common, and this kind of racial humor, racist humor was the key, was part of the culture. And to me, you get a little sense of Jim Crow Harford County from these images and understanding this culture and how what that might have been like. Okay, next slide, please. School desegregation. Somebody mentioned this earlier. I think Sue or Mark Petriquin about the struggle to desegregate Harford County public schools. Now, we have a number of stories in the app which detail a lot of this, so I'm not going to go over that in too much detail right now. Feel free to look at the app, but I think the big story is how long it took. The Brown versus Board of Ed, the famous case that ruled that separate was unequal by race. It was about a Kansas school district, but applied across the country. Why did it take so long? And part of the story was because the white administration of Harford County Public Schools, the Board of Education at that time, and their superintendent had no real interest in desegregating Harford County Public Schools. But it took a lot of really hard work on the part of students and parents and teachers and lawyers to file a number of lawsuits to try and speed it up. And these are detailed in the app. But one interesting case involved a man named Dwight Pettit, who very famously was one of the early groups of kids of color that desegregated Aberdeen High School. Was very interesting because his father was a scientist posted at Aberdeen, and that's why they moved to Harford County. He was at APG, that's why they moved here for his job. But Dwight Pettit was districted or sent to the Havre de Grace Consolidated School, which did everything it could, by the way, and established an incredibly tight community. But it didn't have the advanced or higher level math and science classes that Mr. Pettit, Dwight's father, thought his son should have. So he tried for 2 years, from 1958 to 1960, to get his son to go. And it took a federal case, finally, which he won. And it was one of the few legal lawsuits that were filed to get this accomplished before full integration was finally decided and agreed upon by the district in 1964 to end up finally happen in 1965. But one of the interesting things about the Pettit case was that it exposed some interesting practices in Harford County with regards to the unequal practice of education. For example, it turned out that if you were a student of color coming into the district, like the young Pettit, Dwight Pettit, you had to take an intelligence test to then try and show that you were qualified to go to Aberdeen High School. But if you were a white kid, say coming in from Baltimore or some other place, you didn't have to take that test. That was clearly, that was still going on, by the way, in 1958, when the Pettits began the process of trying to get Alvin Dwight Pettit into Aberdeen High School. Another interesting aspect of the long, mainly legal process to desegregate Harford County Public Schools was the involvement of the NAACP. A very prominent, and as many of you might know, the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, led by Thurgood Marshall, later became a Supreme Court justice, was based in Baltimore. There was another very prominent lawyer as well named Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who came from a very esteemed civil rights family in Baltimore, was involved in both Thurgood Marshall and Miss Mitchell were involved in the Harford County cases, as well as another top lawyer for the Legal Defense Fund named Jack Greenberg. So, and in fact, some of the findings, particularly in the Pettit case, had national significance, this idea of using intelligence tests, when clearly that was a violation of the law, years after the Brown versus Board of Ed case. So, some interesting aspects. Another interesting aspect of school desegregation was the role of teachers, particularly teachers of color, who taught at the two consolidated schools, Harvard Grace and Central, which is where Hickory Elementary is today, who finally gathered because they were, while desegregation was taking place, albeit pretty slowly, there was still a very hard and fast rule in the 1950s and early 60s that if you were a teacher of color, Harford County public school teacher, teaching at Harvard Grace or Central, you could not go to one of the desegregating majority white schools because there was a very strong opposition to black teachers teaching white kids. And in 1964, it were teachers that actually got part of this final lawsuit that pushed for this and showed how ridiculous that was and how unequal and really against the spirit of legal desegregation at that time. So again, you can read more about this in the app and learn more about the unfolding story. Okay, next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about a very famous, or relatively locally famous incident that occurred in 1960 at Harford Memorial Hospital. I first learned of this case through my wife, Lisa, who's here, who actually worked for Upper Chesapeake and knew about it for a program that they were doing in 2018. And it involved a man named Willie Stamps and his family, his wife, who was pregnant, and who went to the hospital, and at Harford Memorial, a tragedy occurred where the baby, his baby son Carlos, and his wife Patricia, who was from Port Deposit originally, both died. In all likelihood, the baby could have been saved if they had access to a higher level incubator that was in the white obstetrics ward. You see, Harford Memorial Hospital was segregated at that time. And I've talked to Mr. Stamps about this, he's shared it. In the process of them having to essentially bring the incubator from upstairs and bring it down in the hospital to the lower floor where the black obstetrics ward was, they took too much time. When baby Carlos, who was I think born breech, it was a complicated delivery, lost too much oxygen and couldn't be saved. So the horrors of Jim Crow segregation played out literally at Harford Memorial, and the Stamps family tragedy that occurred. And there's a lot more to the story and what the folks at Harford Memorial Hospital did, and later Upper Chesapeake did, to reach out and work with Mr. Stamps later. And today there's a memorial to Mr. Stamps and his family, and also his attending physician, Dr. George Stansberry, a longtime African-American doctor at Harvard Grace. And as I understand it, that exhibition currently in the Harford Memorial Hospital, it will be moved and set up in a prominent place at the new facility in Aberdeen that's just about opening as we speak, right? So I don't know if we have all the details on that yet, but I know a lot of people in the community are very concerned about that, and so I think it'll happen. Next slide. So I don't know, hopefully, I'm not sure if this will work or not, but we did an oral history of an interview, a student actually, when Mr. Stamps visited the college in 2019 for an event that we had during the grant project. And in this clip, he talks about how his experience here in Harford, the tragedy of his family losing his baby son and wife, led to his later leadership and civil rights involvement where he was based and went back to afterwards in Detroit, Michigan. So And maybe we can try to play the clip, see if it'll work. Oh, no. Not going to hear it. Okay. Well, there's clips of Mr. Stamps on the HCRP app in the Harford Memorial story, so I strongly encourage you to listen and go there and hear him directly. He's a wonderful man. I've gotten to know him a little bit through the work we've done, and just a little bit about him. So, you know, he had come to Maryland and Harford County because his wife's family was here, and they were set up and were working. But his home, he was born in rural Mississippi, actually, but in the Great Migration of the mid-20th century, his family moved to Chicago and Detroit, and he spent most of his formative years in Detroit, and that's where he went back to after his experience in Harford County in the 1960s. So the incident occurred here in 1960. A couple years later, Mr. Stamps was back in Detroit, and he got a job working for Detroit Edison, the utility company there. And in 1967, he led a major lawsuit against Detroit Edison, alleging a whole range of discriminatory activities, harassment on the job, where a lot of stories where people of color were denied promotions and treated very unfairly. It took 7 years to litigate finally, but the case, actually, he won the case. It's called Stamps versus Detroit Edison. You can look it up. We do allude to it in the ACRP story, but there's a lot of documentation because it's like a landmark civil rights case of the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. And Mr. Stamps, too bad we can't hear him in this clip, but what he talks about in this clip is how his story, what happened to him in Harford County, involving his wife, Pat, and his baby, Carlos, awakened a civil rights consciousness within him, where he hadn't really been focused on it much before. But what happened to him led him to be a leader in Detroit, and really for much of the remainder of his life in the late 20th century, especially in leading the Detroit Edison case, which he's told me some stories about what happened to him and the violent intimidation of him as part of his leadership and what was going on in Detroit, like in the 1970s and 80s. They're harrowing, very, very difficult. But his experience here had a much larger importance because of who he became afterwards and the leadership he exhibited in Detroit in the civil rights community. So I think that's a very interesting part of his story, maybe not as well known as in Harford County, at least, of what happened to him at Harford Memorial and his family. Okay, next slide, please. So talk a little bit about the Route 40 Freedom Ride. It took place in 1961. Marla referred to it earlier. So 1961 Freedom Rides were a joint project, essentially, by the Congress of Racial Equality and the new dynamic civil rights organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Maybe you've heard of Representative John Lewis, civil rights leader from Alabama and Georgia. He was involved in SNCC. And the Freedom Rides more famously were about desegregating transportation facilities like public bus terminals and launching voter registration drives in the Deep South, right, where they were attacked in states like Georgia and Alabama. In Alabama, one of their buses was firebombed. I mean, it's horrible. So less well-known is the Freedom Ride that occurred right here in Harford County. It was between Baltimore and the Delaware Memorial Bridge, up and down Route 40. And this is 2 years before I-95 opened. So at that time, if you wanted to drive between New York and Baltimore and DC, you would take Route 40. And a lot of the restaurants, they had a lot of restaurants and motels catering to the travelers, were segregated. Some were divided, white and black areas, but a lot of the restaurants in Harford County, in Cecil, in Baltimore County, would not even allow black patrons. This blew up nationally in June of 1961 when a handful of African diplomats traveling between New York, the UN, and DC were not allowed service. And one of the more famous incidents occurred right at a diner in Edgewood. It's no longer here, called the Bonnie Bray. I don't know if anybody's been in Harford County a long time might remember that, but it's where the southern precinct of the Harford County Sheriff's Office is now. That's a little hill in Edgewood. And that story became internationally famous because the delegation, an ambassador from the new African nation of Chad, went to the Kennedy administration and complained, and the Kennedy administration, which was supportive of civil rights, but early in the Kennedy presidency in 1961, a little uneasy about fully supporting the movement because of the politics of it, and particularly the continuing strength of Southern Democrats. But the Kennedy administration had an issue here, and of course, if you know Cold War politics, the segregation issues, Jim Crow was brought up by the Soviets, so it actually led to a particular liaison being appointed who tried to work with these segregated restaurants in Maryland, including Harford, to get them past segregation and move on. CORE got involved, and a leadership of civil rights leaders in Baltimore, they worked with a lot of the restaurants to desegregate, and they agreed to, many of them. This is in October and November of 1961. But then CORE, including SNCC volunteers, tested them in early December of 1961. So these restaurants, like the Bonnie Bray, agreed to desegregate. But it turned out a lot did, but a lot didn't, even though they said they would. And this led to the freedom ride that occurred on December 16th, 1961, in which you had people driving, mainly young people from Baltimore, other parts of Maryland, New York, New Jersey, across the Delaware Memorial Bridge, to commit essentially civil disobedience in the still segregated restaurants along Route 40. Aberdeen was a hot spot, had a few restaurants that were the sites of the Freedom Ride protesters, and also sites of the counter-protest. That is, mainly white Harford Countyans came out to protest, and you had scenes in a couple of restaurants that are no longer with us, the original Aberdeen Diner and also the Aberdeen Restaurant, where you had counter-protests, and you had there's stories about mobs coming into the restaurants and yelling and harassing the Freedom Riders. One story that's really interesting was a young man who was part of the protest, but he was an Alabama person of color who was based at Aberdeen. Aberdeen was a soldier in the Army. He was posted at APG, and he actually came out in Aberdeen to see what was going on, and somebody from an upper floor window dropped a bucket of cold water on his head, and this is in December, so it's a very interesting scene. We document it really well in the app. We have a few stories that relate to it, so I'd take a look. And it's not as well known as the bigger freedom rides which occurred in the Deep South, but it's very interesting, and you can learn a lot more about it on the app. The document on the left, you can't read it here, but what that is actually an FBI communique, the teletext. It's like an early form of texting or internet email, in which it documents how the FBI had undercover agents in CORE, in SNCC, who were documenting and reporting back. And so this is about the organizations, and this being a teletext being reported back to headquarters about these Freedom Riders organizing and their plans, say, to drive down from New York and New Jersey. Okay. We're hoping to do more on this in the project. There are very few of these restaurants left from the 1961 Freedom Ride. One that is left is a restaurant called Ray's Caribbean American Food, which on Route 40 in Aberdeen, which in 1961 was called the Sportsman Grill, and one of the stops on the Freedom Ride. And so I'm actually trying to work right now with a few people, including the owner of Ray's, to try and establish it as a historic site and create a little exhibition, because there's nothing like this. There's no other documentation, and again, there are very few of these buildings even left. So we're hoping to actually change that and do something at Rays. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a point of pride. This is a little cartoon I like to show in my presentations. In 2022, I gave a presentation to the college's Board of Trustees, and a reporter from the Aegis was there, as they always are for our board meetings, and like 10 days later, this cartoon appeared in the Aegis, which I've kept, and I thought, wow, that's really neat, and if we can educate the next generation on civil rights and this and use technology, all the best, so that's again a little point of pride. Okay, so another thing, that this is new information, so it didn't make today's presentation, but I want to point out, that the connection of the UUFHC to civil rights in the era, and who was it? I think Sue, Ms. Naus, talked about that, the history of the congregation, but just recently, I've been developing more information about a particular project that was called the Harford Interracial Dialogues that occurred. And it began in 1968, and they were basically conversations and scripted, you might say, little dialogues that took place between black people and white people in Harford County, beginning in 1968 and lasting at least through the 1970s. And they would take place at a number of local churches and even in people's homes, but one of the churches involved was the UUFHC in Bel Air, and the one that's now, it's also a church now. It's across from Shamrock Park, if anybody knows that, in Bel Air. And I've also just discussed, there's a man named Mr. Woodward, Arthur Woodward, and his wife Mary, who, I don't know if anybody knows the Woodwards, they were a big part of that. The connection between the congregation here and the Harford Interracial Dialogues that occurred. And this is the new information that I just discovered, because we have a HID story on the app. You can read more about the HID. The HID led to an offshoot, an economic opportunity group. It was called the Harford Action Group. It was kind of an extension of the HID. And the idea was to create more black economic opportunities, more entrepreneurship and loans for African Americans to start businesses and expand economic opportunity in Harford. The very first meeting of the Harford Action Group took place in 1970 at the UUFHC in Bel Air. It began that, actually. So it's just something new I just learned in research I was doing about a couple weeks ago. All right. Next slide. I think we're getting close to the end here. So this is the end, but I want to point out that I mentioned that we're having our second annual Civil Rights Leadership Award event happening on February 15th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the college. It's open to the community and it's free, but we are asking people, you do need to go to the college's site and essentially reserve your tickets, which there's only a limited capacity, so if you're interested, I wouldn't wait on that, but you can use that QR code and reserve your free spot if you're interested, and we're going to make our second Civil Rights Leadership presentation again on February 15th. And if you see me later, you can ask questions. I'll be happy to share that. All right, and that's my presentation. Hope I didn't go too long. Oh yes, right, we have questions. So we have a little time for questions if anybody has any. Yes.
Bring the microphone to you so people on Zoom can hear.
Regarding Mr. Stamps and his family that he lost, was there any financial, I can't think of the right word, compensation to his family?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting story about that, because you can imagine that the leaders, the chair and the board of the hospital, Harford Memorial, were worried about a lawsuit. And in fact, when Mr. Stamps was back in Detroit, I think the chair of the board of the hospital at the time actually flew up to see him in Detroit. This would have been probably 1961 or 62, to try and negotiate with him, say, what are we going to do? And he basically said, well, I will drop any lawsuit if you change your policy, number one, and get rid of the segregation, and number two, do something to remember my wife and son who died, Pat and Carlos. So he never actually did file a lawsuit because they agreed to that. And then the Maryland Public Accommodations Act passed, and then the Civil Rights Act in 1964, not long after. So segregation was wiped out across the board. But it took decades for Harford Memorial and then Upper Chesapeake, now the University of Maryland, to recognize and to honor that commitment to recognize Pat and Carlos. And in fact, every now and then Mr. Sands would check. He was obviously very busy, preoccupied. But it wasn't until 2010, which was, what was that? Many decades after what happened, that the hospital finally agreed, okay, we're going to honor our promise from the 60s and do something to remember Pat and Carlos. And even then, it took another 8 years to actually get it done. And that's led to the exhibition currently in the lobby of Harford Memorial, recognizing Pat and Carlos and also Dr. Stansberry. Yeah. So.
I have a question. During the 60s, when the Freedom Riders were migrating from Jersey or wherever down through Baltimore and that sort of thing, was there a push to create any minority-owned businesses, restaurants, and if so, if there were businesses being established that could have, reduced stress, how were those businesses? How were those businesses welcomed by the community?
Well, at that time, there were a number of black-owned businesses that catered to the community. Havre de Grace restaurants and stores. There was a restaurant called the Afro in Aberdeen, which was kind of in response to Jim Crow segregation. There was a push for economic equality and economic opportunity that was part of the big civil rights movement that the Freedom Riders were a part of. It was more about economic inequality, like wage inequality and job discrimination, but there was an entrepreneurial part to it. The aspects of it related to Harford County I'm much more familiar with as it came a little bit later in the 60s and the early 70s. But I can tell you that even in the big civil rights movement led by Dr. King, but others, including people like John Lewis, in the early 60s, economic equality, social equality was as much of a push as political rights and civil equality and getting rid of segregation. So, and not long after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, Dr. King shifted very much to economic equality and business opportunity for people of color. If that helps, I know that's not a real great answer, but hopefully that helped a little. Okay.
It's not really a question too much, more of a statement. I heard you said that you got a lot of your information from different colored schools. A lot of the people in the colored schools, they're not really from here originally. Have you talked to some of the original people that are from this area historically, in the Havre de Grace area? You mentioned the Afro. Mr. Herb Parker owned that. My family, the Bishops and the Bonds, I have an aunt who was in, who had to go to one of those schools in what they called a panel bus. You know what I mean? Had no windows. And so she has a lot of history. I have another friend who has a lot of history. That was firsthand. I was brought up with my great aunts who were 105 and 106 respectively. So they told me a lot of the history that went on in this area. So there's people that may have a little bit more direct, and I know Miss Bertha, very personally. She know my family very well.
Yes.
I'm also related to the Hilton family, Sergeant B. Hilton. So, because my family's been here since the 1700s, have you directly talked to those type of entities? That's the first thing. Second thing, I noticed you're talking about a Civil Rights Leadership Award. What was the qualifications of who got nominated? Because there's a lot of people doing work. I'm one of those people that never get invited to the party. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm doing all the writing of the policy outside of that. I was responsible for writing multiple policies at the state level that I never get credit for. And I'm not trying to ring my bell, but sometimes you're not in that performative light. How do you qualify who gets the Civil Rights Award?
Well, first of all, I don't know if the slide was here. I think it had my email address. We have a community of interest. People have been involved in the project. Please write this down or talk to me later. You can email me, and I want you to get involved in that community of interest. As far as oral history and the research we've done, with the limited time and resources we've had, we've only just done a little, in terms of oral history, interviews that we've accomplished. We've been able to utilize the really good oral history interviews of people like Miss Copeland and others on the HCPL's Living Treasures site as well. But I know there's plenty of people that we haven't talked to. We are having another listening session. This is like a group conversation that's part of the county grant that we have coming up in, it'll be in Edgewood in April or May. We haven't set the date yet, but that'll be a good opportunity too to bring in some people. But I would say get on our list, get on my email list. And I know there are a lot of people that have been doing things, have been active in the community that are maybe not outside the more organized history groups like the folks at the Harford Grace College School. So please get in touch. Second, on the Leadership Award, so we came up with the criteria last year. The committee, I have an advisory board for the project through the college and people in the community, and we sent it out last year to the community interest group. The idea is to share it in networks too. And then we revised those criteria again for the latest round, which the deadline for nominations just closed this last Friday, actually, January 12th. But we're constantly, looking at this. So hopefully, we'll have a third award, a third event and award next year in 2025, and we'll look at it. But yeah, if anybody wants, if you don't talk to me today, just jcarmel, JKARMEL @harford.edu. That's my email address. Please reach out to me if you know people that you think are good oral history narrators, people that have stories to share, pictures, items that they want to contribute their history. Please reach out. I know that there's a lot of people and a lot of history that we haven't tapped into yet. And then, we'll take it from there. Okay. Questions? We're done? Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. We've received a lot of information, and when we are going to finish with the program, but I am curious when I speak to everyone afterwards, I want to know 5 nuggets of that you learned, because I know you all are learning a whole lot. So this is great. So I'm excited to announce information about Ms. Mabel Hart. Ms. Mabel Hart is a Harford County Public School 2011 Hall of Fame inductee and Havre de Grace resident. She taught at Havre de Grace Consolidated School from 1945 to 1965, and she remained there when the school became Oakington Elementary, continuing to teach from 1965 to 1978, at which time she retired. Havre de Grace Consolidated School was built at 201 Oakington Road in 1953. The school was created to combine the former Havre de Grace colored elementary and high schools under one building. Havre de Grace Colored High School was the first school that allowed colored students in Harford County seeking a secondary education to get one without having to travel out of the county to get it. The combining of elementary and high school meant that students could now, from grades kindergarten through 12, could all be at the same school. And she'd always tout that the class of 1975 was the last to graduate from Harvard Grace Consolidated Schools, and highly stays in touch with her. She's always getting visits and cards from people from the class of 1965. Ms. Mabel Hart will tell you that she constantly receives visits and that she enjoys them. The school was renamed to Oakington Elementary and later Roy Williams Elementary School, which is still the school's name today. The school got its name from the former principal of Harvard Grace Consolidated School, Mr. Leon S. Roy, and the former principal of Bel Air Central Consolidated School, Dr. Percy V. Williams. When I interviewed Miss Mabel Hart at our home, she was such a pleasure to be with, and that wasn't my first time visiting her. You see, Miss Mabel Hart is a member of the Prince Hall affiliated Order of Eastern Stars, and we happen to be a member of the same chapter. Evening Star chapter number 20 out of Harvard Grace. So I've known her for quite a while. She enjoys traveling, writing, and believes that the water along the Chesapeake is the most beautiful. She never ceases to amaze me. 2 years ago, she had published her first book called In Her Own Words. It is from this book that was published when she was 102 years old that Miss Lillian Moss will read an excerpt. Miss Lillian, will you please come up?
Harvard Grace, about 1930. I moved to this town about this time. It was not a city then, but it was still trying to be. We knew that we were different, or they, whites, were different. First, there was the high school. The big white school was uptown, brick, and quite large with a gym. The gym for black kids was in the alley on the dirt. Then there were the movies. Black kids sat upstairs in the balcony, while white kids sat downstairs. There were certain areas where white kids and black kids skated on separate streets. If they happened to get there at the same time, there would probably be a fight and a lot of name-callings. Poor Mr. Roy, our principal, you would find him apologizing the next day for us. Blacks never went to white restaurants unless you were working in the kitchen, like me, washing dishes. Mayor George Pennington was in charge of the city. There was no city council, so he made whatever decisions he felt were needed for all the people. Double standard, of course. One fact about Mayor Pennington, if he was aware of it, no one, black or any group, went hungry during the lean depression years. Mr. Pennington made his contact with the Masons. They actually represented the black community. For the Masons, Leo Jones, Tom Holland, and Josh Williams were his eyes and ears. They were a strong force. Most of the merchants were Jewish and owned most of the businesses. They closed every Wednesday evenings. Everything was closed, even Sundays. The town was mostly divided into areas according to ethnic groups. Italians lived uptown called Tallytown. Jewish people lived mostly in apartments over their stores. The whites lived in huge white houses on Union Avenue, Market Street, and Washington Streets, or owned large farms. The blacks lived in the alleys, Gas Bottom and Hilltown. They also lived around the edges of the river. And the up blacks lived on 2 blocks of Girard, Stokes, and Revolution, Otsego, and Hilltown. There were no Asians. At that time, the entire park and marina was swampland. Maybe one day it will sink back into the river. Raw sewage was dumped into the river. Everyone swam in the river. No one caught a disease, but few drowned. There was an invisible line to let you know that you were segregated. That is one thing, regardless of the laws. Segregation, except for housing, is alive and well in Harvard Grace. The black professionals were as follows: Mr. Leon Roy, principal of the Colored High School; Almer Bullock, mortician; Claude Cohen, medical doctor; Dr. Christmas, visiting dentist; Frank Ridgely, laundry and boat owner; Mr. Barrett, barber; Gertrude Matthews and Ringgold Tilden were dry cleaners. The black women worked as domestics, and the black men were laborers, farm workers, or worked for the railroad. Thank you.
Going back to Miss Bertha Copeland. Just as she worked with the Freedom Riders along Route 40 corridor, Ms. Copeland played a very strong role in forwarding civil rights gains in the area of housing. Before I let you tell you herself, I'd be remiss not to share with you on how hospitable she was upon my interview of her. Annually, Ms. Copeland bakes hundreds of sweet potato pies to distribute. Of course, I left with one to eat upon departing her home. I say all this to share that it is people like Ms. Copeland who share her values of advocacy, care, and engagement is what makes our country, state, and county a safer place to live. Thank you, Ms. Copeland. Before you enjoy the clip of her remarks and participation with her advocacy for housing, let me share that in 1952, she moved to the Hamilton Court, Washington Park area of Aberdeen from Florida when her husband was transferred to the Bainbridge Naval Training Center in Port Deposit, Cecil County. Because this was 2 years before the Brown versus Board of Education ruling by the United States Supreme Court, her son had to attend the Old Post Colored School, a segregated school for blacks only. A small group of women in the area started helping their neighbors, and the movement grew and evolved into the Hamilton Court Improvement Association. Mrs. Copeland served there as an officer. You may view the clip.
Good evening, everyone. This is Marla Posey Moss interviewing Ms. Bertha Copeland of Harford County. And Ms. Copeland, thank you for participating in this interview process for our Dr. King service. I would like to first ask you, when were you born?
I was born February 8th, 1930 at Lake Wales, Florida.
Wonderful. And when did you come to Harford County?
Came to Harford County 1953.
1953.
Mm-hmm.
And what brought you here?
My husband was stationed at Bainbridge Navy Base.
Wonderful. Would you mind sharing some of your experiences or observations with regards to civil rights as it pertains to the housing industry in Harford County?
In Harford County, at the time we moved here, it was segregated. We only had a few housing areas that we could rent housing. So eventually we moved to Hamilton Court on Old Post Road. And it was segregated with only black people living there at the time. So then I got involved with some ladies, decided that we were going to do something about the condition of the housing. 10 of us started, we organized, and eventually we ended up being incorporated. So we started going around talking to people and talking to the director, the owner of the building, of the apartments, asking them to paint the apartments because at that time they were pink. So we got that painted and we started trying to work on the roads. So they wanted to put blacktop sidewalks, and we stopped that. And they were upset about that because they didn't have it in other areas, why they was gonna put it in our area. So anyway, we kept on, we got involved with the school system. So the first time at the Hall Cross Road, that was the first one that they had when they integrated. That black kids could go to that school. And another, before that time, we lived across the street from North Dean, and Hamilton Court was to the left of North Dean, and they decided they were gonna stop the black kids from riding the school bus and would continue to let the white kids on North Dean continue to ride. So we had to go through a Board of Education. We got that stopped. So we just kept on because we kept saying that it wasn't fair with the houses. So when they started integrating houses, started building houses, we decided we would go around to the houses to see could they get them integrated. So we did that. And sometimes they would lock the doors on us, but we continued to do it anyway. So we kept fighting until we got that straightened out. We went up to the city council. We used to go up there every week and talk to them and try to get them to improve the condition of the housing, the roads. So eventually we ended up having, we got $80,000 from Episcopal Archdiocese for impoverished neighborhoods. So we ended up having a committee, We had a director, Clarence Davis, and we started doing more involvement with the group. And not only that, we also helped with civil rights walkers when they were walking through the civil rights walkers. We fed them, had them at the house. We fed them. So we were doing everything to try to make sure the condition got better. Eventually, they did. They started decided that they were going to go ahead and build new housing, which they did. They built new houses. And after they built the new houses, it was integrated. And that way, people moved out in different areas because we didn't have so many areas for black people to live. So they ended up building 2 neighborhoods, and a lot of black people moved out there. But one thing what we was concerned about too, because a lot of people that worked on the proving grounds that came from other states, they could only stay in Hamilton Court because they had no other place. And that was part of the reason why we decided we would do a lot to integrate. We ended up having an interracial dialogue group, and that helped out a great deal too with the interracial dialogue group, because they was able to go around with us and protest until we got things changed around. So that's why I was so glad that I was a part of the housing, getting that done and helping other people to live better in the condition that we had been living in before that time.
Thank you. Well, that was
She is a member of the Harford County Board of Education. So I will at least read the accolades for her because she did commit to come, but I'm pretty certain she's not here because it is currently snowing. I've known Ms. Bruce in several different capacities, personally and professionally, in Harford County. She's a 2020 Harford County Living Treasure. I have witnessed her run stellar meetings, and she served as an advisor and parliamentarian for my daughter's Silver Award project as a Girl Scout. She also served as my son's advisor for his Eagle Scout project conducted at the Havre de Grace Color School. Ms. Bruce is a former member of the Harford County Board of Elections. Bruce is a graduate of Havre de Grace Consolidated School, now Roy Williams Elementary School in the Oakington area between Aberdeen and Havre de Grace, which was open from 1950 until schools were desegregated in 1965. There really isn't enough that can be said about her service and recognition, so I will just name a few. She's a life member of Morgan State University Alumni Association and a member of the Harford County Alumni Chapter. She retired from the United States Army Ordnance Center and School in 2006 as a resource manager in charge of personnel and finances. Mrs. Bruce's mother, Elizabeth Joyner Sawyer, graduated from the Havre de Grace Color School in 1940. She and her husband, Thomas, were the first African Americans to own a business in Havre de Grace, Maryland, and owned it for over 30 years until 2007. Mrs. Bruce is a Diamond Life member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and a member of the Harford County chapter. She's a charter member of the Susquehanna chapter of Blacks in Government, beginning her membership in 1977. She served in a variety of positions at the local, regional, and national levels for 40 years, to include recognition as a Gold Plus Life member. She is a recipient of the Region 3 Congressman Elijah Cummings Award, and she is a life member of the NAACP and active with the local county branch. Among many of her class, she is a pillar in the community. It is my distinct pleasure to at least have her a part of the program. I will let her know you all send to her your blessings. Next, we will have Martina Kaczynski provide you another presentation as it pertains with our youth.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's have some fun engagement with the youth of our congregation and community. In this segment of the program, youth will state a quote, and if you recognize it, raise your hand and you may be called on to select which civil rights icon denoted in your program stated it. Be sure to note which civil rights leader has already been suggested as an answer, as well as the correct answer. And because a small gift is provided upon a right answer, answers from the chat can be provided to a person via text if you know someone who is in the audience. In other words, those attendees who are virtual can be used as a lifeline. 3 audience members per quote may answer, but if you have already won a prize, please defer the correct answer to another attendee. Our youth runners will provide the prizes, and I will confirm the correct answer or simply ask that you do some more research. Please raise your hand or stand for the runner to find you and deliver your gift. Youth and young adults, please position yourselves up front. And when all quotes have been answered, you may come obtain your gift bag and return to your seats. May the participants for this program segment please make your way to the front.
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
Please raise your hand if you know the answer. Remember, the list of possible names are in your program. Karen?
I think it might be W.E. Du Bois.
Not quite. Please do some more research. We have a gentleman over here. Not quite. Please do some more research. Yes. Correct, and congratulations. Please leave your hand up or stand up for the runner to bring you your prize.
The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Anyone know the answer? Yes. Not quite. Please do some more research. Yes. Not quite. Please do some more research. Yes. Not quite. Please do some more research. That was 3 incorrect answers, so we will skip that quote. And after the program, anyone with any more guesses for which civil rights leader you believe that was, come to me, and if you're correct, you may receive your prize.
The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them.
Yes. Nope, not quite. Please do some more research. Yes. Not quite. Please do some more research. Yes. Not quite. Please do some more research. We will skip this quote, and after the program, if you have a guess, please come to me. Next one, please.
Rule following: legal precedents and political consistency are not more important than right, justice, and plain common sense.
Yes. Correct, and congratulations. Please leave up your hand for the runner to bring your prize to you.
I am sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Correct, and congratulations. Please leave up your hand or stand up for the runner to bring you your prize. Next person, read the quote, please.
You must never be fearful about doing what's right.
Anyone? Paul? Not quite. Please do some more research. Yes? Correct, and congratulations. Please leave your hand up or stand up for the runner to bring you your prize.
If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
Yes. Correct, and congratulations. Please leave your hand up for the runner to bring your prize. And remember, if you have correctly guessed in the past, please give your prize to someone else.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Correct. Please. Please stand up or raise your hand to receive your prize. Okay, next quote, please.
Hate is too great a burden to bear.
What is your guess? Nope, not quite. Please do some more research. The guess was Gandhi, which was an incorrect answer. Correct, and congratulations. Please leave up your hand for the runner to bring you your prize.
First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win.
Yes? Correct, and congratulations. Please raise your hand so you may receive your prize. And remember, we have a couple of quotes that no one was able to correctly guess, so if you would like to find me after the program to give your guesses, you may do so. Thanks for playing.
That was great. I love that. As this program comes to a close, we would like anyone to share a story relating to civil rights, whether it be here in Harford County or elsewhere. Attendees from the chat are welcome to participate as well. Is there anyone who would like to make a remark, their experience here or elsewhere with regards to civil rights? Anyone from the chat? Oh, you will? Oh, wonderful. Thank you. You can introduce yourself.
Well, I have a few of them, but I'm gonna talk about H. Rap Brown. So everybody knows who H. Rap Brown is, right? So H. Rap Brown, I guess he got in trouble in this area, and he was supposed to actually have a court case. And I believe it was supposed to be in Cambridge, Maryland, actually. But it ended up in Bel Air. And then there was an explosion, I believe on Route 40. And so they decided to move it to Howard. So that's not all the details. There was a little bit more details than that. But that was like the big story of H. Rap Brown being in this area. He was part of SNCC at that time. He wasn't actually part of the Black Panther Party at that time, which actually led to his death, because he became extremely powerful. He was really young. He was a great speaker. He was a great power in terms of, wow. if you ever get to read any of his writings, you really need to. He was very influential to me. Let me think of something else that also influenced me. My family. My family, my cousin Joe Bond, he used to be the head of the NAACP here. Harford County has struggled with integration, segregation, and all kinds of things. Obviously, the speakers talked about that today. It was the last to integrate in Maryland, the last. Okay, that's the first thing we want to talk about. My cousin Joe Bond fought as the leader of the NAACP to get rid of wage discrimination. I mean, just everything you could think of. I'm sure Ms. Bertha knows very well. She could probably tell much better stories than I can, but I know he was one of my idols as a cousin. Mr. Walter Banks was my dad's best friend. I used to go out with them when they were down the street, and they used to hunt with my dad's friend, Mr. And then this is like I'm talking off the cuff, Mr. Cass, in his little, what do they call it? I forget what they call it, but they would used to hunt in these little areas, and I used to have to take them food and whatever while they would hunt, and I used to train their dogs. But in either case, Mr. Walter Banks was a sweetheart. But just a little brief story about why a lot of times black people would sell their land cheaper is because they were very intimidated by white folk. I mean, I'm not saying that he didn't do it out of kindness of his heart. He might have. But he was also very intimidated, because it was very intimidating to be a black person and then have a white person come at you and say that you need to sell that, because a lot of times it came with some other intimidation and violence. And when I mean violence. Threats of your life. I've experienced it as a young child on my property when I was a child. So those are just a few stories. I know it was all over the place a little bit, but those were some of the experiences that I've experienced in Harford County. And it's what drives me. That's why I'm never invited to the party, because I'm never going to be that kind of person that's going to put on a performance. I'm going to do the work. And so I do want to put one thing out. This is a little PR for my organization that's a nonprofit. It's called the Policy Foundation of Maryland. What we do, we are a think tank. We write policy. We write policy to move this area forward and the state forward, specifically for black and marginalized people. What does that mean? That means anybody who's marginalized. That could be women, that could be children, that could be people that are disabled. And so if you're interested in helping us write and move policy together, support Policy Foundation of Maryland, spelled out, at gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make any remarks with regards to civil rights, here or elsewhere? Is there anyone from the chat? No? All right. We will now receive the benediction from Reverend J. Brooks. Thank you.
As the gathered here at this program, leave and go back to our ordinary lives out in the world, may we go uplifted by the stories of resilience, courage, and conviction that we have heard today. May we go inspired by the recollections and memories of the amazing civil rights work that has come before us. And may we go determined to find ways to make a difference in our own time and our own lives, so that the future can be one where there is fairness and equity for all. Amen, and blessed be.
There are refreshments in the back. You're more than welcome to get food. This program has concluded. Thank you for attending.